Step out of the car now. People like you always lie." Those were the first words Chief Donovan Briggs hurled at Agent Darius Hale before slamming the rental car door open with a violent shove. The blow struck Darius's shoulder and forced him sideways. Briggs reached in, seized Darius's collar, and yanked him forward with such force that the seatbelt carved a sharp line across his ribs. His breath caught. His pulse jumped. The sudden pain felt like a flash of heat through his chest. Briggs dragged him out onto the pavement. Darius stumbled as his shoes scraped the ground. His arm was twisted behind his back until his joints strained. Briggs pushed down hard, and Darius's knees struck the asphalt. A shock of pain ran up his legs. Dust rose around him, and the humiliation settled on him like a weight he could not lift. The moment lasted only seconds, but it marked the beginning of the end for Briggs and everything he had built on fear. Before we go deeper into this story, tell me where you are watching from today. And if this story matters to you, subscribe to the channel and give me a like. Your support helps these truths reach more people who need to hear them. Darius kept his head down as Briggs held his arm in a painful lock. He did not resist. His training told him stillness was survival. Every breath had to be measured. Every word had to be controlled. Any reaction could expose him. Briggs believed he was attacking a harmless freelance journalist. He had no idea he was assaulting an undercover FBI agent who was recording every second. "Look at me," Briggs said sharply. Darius raised his eyes. He met the gaze of a man who had used the border as his personal kingdom. A man whose authority had gone unchecked for years. A man who believed cruelty was a tool. The anger in Briggs's face was not personal. It was routine. It was practiced. It was the face of a man who had done this before. Darius felt the sting in his ribs where the seatbelt had cut into him. He felt the pressure on his arm. He felt the burn in his knees. But he said nothing. Silence allowed the moment to continue. Silence kept the investigation alive. Deputy Chief Camila Soto stepped closer. Her voice trembled even though she tried to hide it. "Chief, he is not the target. Let him go. We have a family waiting." Briggs ignored her. He pushed Darius harder. Darius's palms flattened against the scorching pavement. The pressure forced a slow breath from his lungs. "You journalists think you can look at us any way you want," Briggs said. "Not today." Darius's heart beat steadily. He needed the recording. He needed the voice. He needed the words that would later open doors in Washington and in courtrooms far from the desert heat. The violence inflicted on him now would become evidence later. Pain had a purpose. After a long pause, Briggs released his grip. Darius steadied himself and rose slowly, hiding the ache that spread through his shoulders. Briggs turned away without another word, as if the attack had been nothing more than routine procedure. Darius walked back to his car. His legs were steady, but his mind was not quiet. The abuse had stirred memories that lived deep inside him. Memories from Houston. Memories of being 8 years old. He had watched his father pinned to a patrol car by 2 officers who refused to listen. He remembered the confusion on his father's face. He remembered the pleading. He remembered the fear he felt as a child when he realized the truth behind power. That memory had shaped his life, and it shaped his mission now. Darius adjusted his shirt and sat back inside the rental car. He closed the door quietly. The pain in his ribs pulsed with each breath, but he forced his hands to remain steady. His mic had captured everything. His camera pen had recorded Briggs's face at the moment of the assault. This was only the beginning, but it was a strong beginning, stronger than he had expected. A line of cars moved forward. The checkpoint was operating as usual. No one suspected that the man just assaulted was an undercover agent documenting one of the largest extortion operations on the Texas border. Darius eased the car forward when the signal changed. The officer waving him through did not even look at him. They believed he was harmless. They believed he was insignificant. Their blindness was their downfall. Once he cleared the checkpoint, Darius pulled onto the shoulder and rested both hands on the steering wheel. He let one long breath escape. It did not ease the pain. It only acknowledged it. He replayed the recording through his earpiece. Every word was clear. Every threat was sharp. Briggs had handed him exactly what he needed. The assault was not only evidence of corruption, it was evidence of character. It painted the truth in a language even the system could not ignore. Darius called his supervising agent, Trent Lawson, in San Antonio. The call connected. Lawson's voice came through calm and practiced. "Report." Darius described the extortion he had witnessed earlier that day. He mentioned the Guatemalan family. He mentioned Soto. And finally, he mentioned the assault. "Did you provoke him?" Lawson asked. "No," Darius replied. "Good," Lawson said. "Stay focused. Do not escalate. Gather what you can." Darius heard something in Lawson's voice, a hesitation, a distance, a note of concern that did not match the severity of the assault. It was too casual, too dismissive. Darius did not trust it. He tucked the reaction away for later. He ended the call and resumed driving toward El Paso. The road stretched ahead, long and quiet. Darius ignored the landscape. His mind was already working through the next steps. He needed a witness. He needed someone inside the system who had broken under the weight of corruption. His phone vibrated. A single message appeared from an unknown number. "Meet me tonight. Public place. I have what you need." Miguel. Darius felt the shift again. Miguel Rivera had stayed hidden for years. His sudden message meant something had forced him out of silence. The danger was real, but the opportunity was greater. Darius whispered to himself, "The door is opening." He tightened his seatbelt. He drove toward the city lights. His ribs hurt. His knees throbbed. But none of it weakened his resolve. The mission had begun with violence, humiliation, and a cruel voice tearing through the desert heat. But Darius understood something that Briggs never had. Pain was not defeat. Pain was clarity. And tonight, the truth would begin to take shape. Miguel Rivera waited in the far corner of the abandoned church, sitting on the last wooden pew with his hands clasped tightly, as if he feared they might shake loose the truth he had held inside for too many years. Darius Hale entered quietly, closing the door behind him with a soft click that echoed in the hollow space. The church offered no comfort. There were no candles, no hymns, no signs of prayer. Only two men carrying the weight of a border that had swallowed too many lives. Darius approached slowly, keeping his movements calm. Miguel looked thinner than the photographs Darius had studied. His eyes held exhaustion, but also a sharp awareness that had not faded with time. "You came," Miguel said. His voice was low and strained. "I said I would," Darius replied. Miguel looked around the empty space. "I chose this place because no one listens here. Not anymore. People stopped coming after the last shooting outside. That is why I talk here. No one wants to be near this place." Darius nodded gently, encouraging him without pushing. Miguel took a careful breath. "You already know something is wrong, but you do not know how deep it goes." Darius sat across from him, leaning forward slightly. "I am here to listen." Miguel opened his hand slowly, as if releasing something fragile. "The extortion ring did not start last year. It did not start 5 years ago. It has been running for 18 years. Thousands of families, thousands of payments. The numbers depend on the week, but on average, 8 to 15 victims every 7 days. $10,000 to $15,000 each, always cash, always through the same hands." Darius listened without moving. Every word mattered. Every pause carried meaning. Briggs runs the entire operation, Miguel continued. He keeps the ledger himself, a handwritten book, numbers tied to initials, dates, drop points, names of drivers. You saw how he behaves. That is how he rules. But he does not work alone. He never has. Darius's pulse tightened. He felt the mission shifting, widening, becoming more dangerous than he had predicted. Camila Soto handles the threats, Miguel said. His voice softened. She does not want to. She is trapped. Her son is in Juarez. The cartel took him 3 years ago. They keep him alive to keep her loyal. She carries the guilt every day. You can see it in her eyes. Darius remembered the tremor in Soto's voice when she told Briggs to release him. Her fear made sense now. Darius felt no hatred toward her, only sorrow. Miguel continued. Mayor Elias Crow takes 40%. He uses it for campaigns, for favors, for his image. He stands on stages and talks about safety while taking money from the suffering of families who cross the river with nothing. Darius's jaw tightened, but he remained still. And District Attorney Marisol Vega, Miguel said. She buries every complaint, every phone call, every witness statement. She does not even disguise it. She knows no one will challenge her. The city fears her, and she fears only one thing, losing Crow's approval. Darius felt the pieces forming in his mind. Each name connected to another. Each motive woven into the next. The corruption was not a line. It was a circle. Miguel slowly reached into his coat. Darius raised his hand gently. Easy, Darius said quietly. Miguel nodded, understanding the instinct. He pulled out a small USB drive and placed it on the wooden pew between them. These are 11 recordings, Miguel said. Voicemails, phone calls, conversations. Some from before I was fired, some from the last months I worked there. They will help you understand the structure, but they are dangerous. Anyone who holds them becomes a target. Darius stared at the USB drive, a simple piece of plastic carrying years of hidden suffering. Miguel looked down. I failed a lot of people. The truth is not enough to save me, but maybe it can save someone else. Maybe you can do what I could not. Darius's voice was steady. I will protect your family. Miguel closed his eyes for a moment, as if the promise gave him a breath he had not taken in years. I hope you can, because they will come again. They always come again. Darius picked up the USB. It felt small in his hand, but heavy in its meaning. Tell me why you contacted me now, Darius said. Miguel lowered his head. Because they found my old notebook. I hid everything I could, but not well enough. They know someone kept records. They do not know it was me yet, but they will soon. Darius leaned closer. What changed? Miguel's voice cracked. You. I saw you at the checkpoint. I saw what Briggs did to you. I saw how you did not break. And I knew you were not like the others. You still believe in justice. That is why I reached out. Darius held Miguel's gaze. I cannot do it alone. Miguel nodded. No one can. That is why they have lasted so long. Darius slipped the USB into his pocket. What about Trent Lawson? Does he know? Miguel hesitated. His silence answered before he spoke. Listen to the recordings. You will hear his voice. Darius felt the breath leave his lungs for a moment. Trent Lawson, his supervisor, his point of contact, his trusted line. The revelation struck him with a cold clarity. Miguel continued. He is part of it. Not the leader, but he protects Briggs. He warns him when someone reports anything. That is why I lost my job. I trusted him with information. I did not know he would hand it back to Briggs. Darius inhaled slowly. The walls of the church felt closer now, not because of fear, but because of the rising shape of the truth. Miguel looked at him with tired eyes. You must be careful. You cannot trust anyone in San Antonio. Not the unit, not the supervisors, only the people you bring in yourself. Darius rose from the pew. I will. Miguel stood. I will disappear again. This is the last time you will see me. If they capture me, they will not let me live long enough to speak. Darius placed a steady hand on Miguel's shoulder. Your courage matters. Miguel swallowed hard. Courage is not enough. You need proof. That is why I gave you this. Darius stepped back toward the door. Stay safe. Miguel watched him go. Bring the truth to daylight. Darius opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt heavy, but his resolve felt firm. He walked toward his car with a slow, measured pace. The USB drive pressed against his pocket like a reminder of the responsibility he carried. He understood the danger. He understood the cost. But he also understood the purpose. When he reached the car, he looked up at the empty sky and whispered the words he lived by. Do not quit. The investigation had deepened. The darkness had shape now. And the truth, though fragile, had finally found a voice. Darius Hale moved through the crowded casino with a deliberate calm, keeping his gaze lowered just enough to disappear into the noise. The neon lights cast bright reflections across the floor. But Darius saw only one thing clearly. Chief Donovan Briggs, standing near the high-stakes tables with a briefcase at his feet. The man who had assaulted Darius only days earlier now spoke with a quiet confidence to two men from Juarez. Men whose faces showed no fear of being seen. Darius paused behind a tall column and pressed his thumb lightly against the recording device in his sleeve. Every detail mattered now. Every word, every gesture, every exchange would help expose a system that had survived 18 years of hidden brutality. Briggs leaned in. His voice carried a low authority. He placed one hand on the briefcase, then slid it closer to the man across from him. The Juarez Courier opened it only a few inches. Darius saw the edge of stacked bills. Clean, unmarked, carefully bundled. Briggs performed the exchange with a confidence that revealed long practice. Nothing about his movements felt new. Nothing felt uncertain. Darius felt a cold clarity rise in him. This was the man behind the suffering of thousands of families. This was the man who believed no one would ever challenge him. Deputy Chief Camila Soto stood several steps behind Briggs. Her arms were crossed tightly. Her eyes did not rest on the money. They rested on the man standing behind the courier, a cartel guard. He held a photograph in his hand. Darius recognized the image even from a distance. A teenage boy with dark hair and fearful eyes. Soto's son. The guard lifted the photograph, tilted it toward her, and placed two fingers against the image in a silent threat. Soto swallowed hard. Her lips trembled. Her shoulders fell for a brief moment before she forced herself upright again. Darius felt the pain in his chest tighten. Soto was trapped, bound by a fear that had taken hold of her life. She had become a part of a machine because the price of refusal was her child's life. Darius did not excuse her actions, but he understood the weight on her shoulders. He understood the cost she lived with every day. Briggs reached out his hand. The courier grasped it. Their handshake was firm, practiced, and cold. It was the gesture that confirmed everything Darius had suspected. The corruption was not theoretical. It was active. It was organized. It had partners across the border, and it operated under the glow of casino lights as if it were nothing more than routine business. Darius lifted his phone slightly and snapped 3 still images, the lens hidden behind a layer of dark plastic. The moment he pressed the shutter, the guard from Juarez lifted his head sharply. His gaze swept the casino floor. Darius shifted his stance and stepped behind a passing couple. The guard's eyes narrowed. Darius felt his heartbeat slow to steady his breath. He had been spotted. Briggs turned his head. His eyes scanned the area. Darius lowered his phone, walked toward the back exit, and kept his posture calm. But he felt the danger rise behind him like a wave preparing to break. When he reached the service hallway, he heard footsteps quicken behind him. "Stop him," Briggs ordered. Darius moved fast. He pushed through the door, stepped into the night, and ran toward the parking lot. The desert air hit his lungs with a dry burn. He reached his car and unlocked it in one motion, but before he could start the engine, 2 trucks sped toward him. Headlights cut across the pavement. He threw the car into drive and accelerated toward the exit. The chase began without hesitation. The trucks closed in from both sides. Darius steered sharply, forcing the rental car onto the access road behind the casino. He kept one hand on the wheel and one hand on the radio clipped inside his jacket. Static filled the channel. He could not call for help. Not yet. The men behind him gained speed. Their engines roared. The sound carried a clear intent. Darius turned toward the desert. The car bounced as it left the pavement. Dust shot upward. The headlights behind him cut through the night in long beams. He aimed toward a small ridge and increased his speed. His pulse remained steady. He had trained for this. He had endured worse. The chase tightened behind him. The trucks moved closer. A shot rang out. The sound hit the night like a sharp crack. Darius felt the car jolt as a bullet struck the rear tire. The vehicle swerved. He fought the wheel with controlled force. Another shot. The second tire burst. The car spun. Darius braced himself as the vehicle slid in a long arc across the sand and came to a stop. Dust settled slowly. The trucks were approaching. Darius jumped out, moved behind the wrecked car, and ran toward the ridge. His lungs pulled hard against the night air. Every step cut through the darkness with urgency. He reached the top of the ridge and looked down. The canyon below provided only one path forward. He climbed down the rocks, using his hands to keep balance. When he reached the bottom, he crouched behind a boulder and listened. The men stopped above him. Flashlights swept the area. Their voices carried through the night. "He went down this way. Find him." Darius pressed his back against the stone. He waited. He slowed his breathing. He allowed silence to protect him. After several tense minutes, the men moved farther up the ridge. Their voices faded. Darius remained hidden until their engines started again, and the trucks drove away. Only then did he climb out from behind the boulder. His knees hurt. His ribs ached. His shoulder throbbed where Briggs had pulled him days earlier. But his resolve remained firm. Pain was not new to him. Pain was not enough to stop him. He walked across the desert floor in the dark until he reached the highway. A single passing driver finally stopped, allowing Darius to call for a discreet pickup. He gave no details, only a location. When he returned to the city, he went straight to Miguel's home. The front door stood open. Darius stepped inside. Miguel's wife was crying softly at the kitchen table. Miguel sat on the couch with his arm in a splint, his face swollen, his breath shallow. He looked up as Darius entered. "They came," Miguel whispered. "They were looking for the notebook. They think someone helped me." Darius felt the anger rise, but he kept his voice steady. "I am here now." Miguel closed his eyes. "You should leave. This is too dangerous." Darius shook his head. "I do not quit." Miguel nodded with a tired relief. "Then you must take the next step. Call someone you can trust, someone far from San Antonio." Darius hesitated for only a moment before calling Agent Isabella Quinn in Houston. He had never met her, but he had read her record. Clean, steady, honest. She answered on the first ring. "This is Darius Hale," he said. "I need a secure backup plan." Her voice came calm and clear. Tell me everything." Darius stood in the small living room, surrounded by fear, bruises, and the painful truth of what this mission demanded. But he also felt something deeper, a growing determination, a quiet fire, a belief that justice, though slow, could still rise. The night had changed everything. The casino, the handshake, the chase, the beating of Miguel, the danger closing in. But Darius remained steady. He whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning," and it was. Because now the truth had found its direction, and the fight was no longer hidden in the shadows. Darius Hale sat at the small table in his apartment and laid out every file, every recording, and every image he had collected over the past weeks. He worked in silence, sorting each item with a precision that came from years of discipline. The bruises on his ribs still hurt when he leaned forward, but the pain did not slow him. Pain reminded him of the urgency. Pain reminded him of the cost. Pain reminded him that every second mattered now. The corruption he had uncovered was larger than he had imagined, and the danger had grown with each step he took. He had no illusions about what would happen if Briggs discovered the full extent of his investigation. Darius prepared 3 copies of the evidence, one for journalist Theo Park, one for retired Judge Sophia Cruz, and one he would keep for himself. He sealed each set in a plain envelope. His hands were steady, but he felt the weight of every choice he made. These 2 allies had not been chosen lightly. Theo had once been extorted by officers during an investigation. Judge Cruz had lost her grandson to a false accusation buried by the same district attorney who now protected Briggs. Both had lived the consequences of corruption. Both understood the truth before they heard it. When Darius finished assembling the files, he sat back and allowed one slow breath to leave his lungs. This was the night everything would shift. This was the night the hidden network would begin to crumble. But he also knew the moment he released this evidence, the danger would rise to its highest point. He called Theo first. "I am sending you the full package," Darius said. "Do not open it until morning, and do not speak to anyone about it." Theo answered quietly, "I understand." Then Darius called Judge Cruz. Her voice carried the steady calm of someone who had lived long enough to see both justice and injustice in equal measure. "Bring the truth," she said. "I will stand with you." Darius ended the calls and closed his laptop. Everything was in motion now. The next steps were not simple. He needed to travel to Austin the following morning for a private meeting arranged by Judge Cruz, one that would prepare the ground for a public announcement. If all went well, the truth would reach the people who needed to hear it. If it failed, the corruption would continue for another generation. But Darius did not anticipate one thing. He did not consider how quickly the enemy would respond once Miguel's notebook was discovered missing. At midnight, Camila Soto walked into the Border Patrol headquarters. Her face was pale. Her hands trembled. She had received a message from the Juarez cartel only minutes earlier, a picture of her son held in a dark room, his eyes red from crying. A single line accompanied the image. "Do what we say tonight, or we do not guarantee tomorrow." Soto walked through the hallway with a numb determination. The evidence room sat at the end of the corridor. Her keycard shook slightly as she lifted it to the lock. The light turned green. She pushed the door open. Rows of shelves stood before her, filled with files, recordings, and seized items that represented years of investigations. Soto knew what she had to destroy. She had been given clear instructions. Burn everything that mentions Briggs. Burn everything that mentions us. Burn anything that can lead back to the ledger. She walked to the back shelf and found the files. She hesitated. Her breath shook. She whispered her son's name. She touched the folder with trembling fingers. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver lighter. She flicked it once. The flame rose. Her eyes filled with tears. "I am sorry," she whispered. She held the flame under the edge of the file. The paper curled and blackened. She placed it on the floor and watched the fire spread. The flames grew quickly, fueled by the dry documents, photographs, and boxes of evidence collected over years. Soto stepped back. Smoke filled the room. Her eyes burned. Her chest tightened. She coughed, but she did not stop. She watched as the fire consumed every piece of truth she had been ordered to destroy. Tears ran down her face. She whispered again, "Forgive me." She backed out of the room and closed the door. The alarm would not sound immediately. The building system had been tampered with earlier that night. She walked out the rear exit, shaking, broken, and empty. Her phone buzzed. A new message arrived. "Good work. Your son will be safe for another day." Soto collapsed against the wall and wept. At that exact moment, Darius was leaving his apartment with the final envelope tucked safely inside his jacket. He walked down the stairwell, feeling the weight of the evidence against his chest. He did not know that the files in El Paso were already burning. He did not know Soto had made a choice that would torment her for the rest of her life. He reached his car and checked the back seat. He always checked. He opened the trunk. Clear. Then he slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The night was quiet. He felt a small sense of hope. He believed the next day would bring answers. He drove onto Interstate 10, heading east toward Austin. The highway stretched ahead, and the city lights faded behind him. 40 minutes later, as he passed the Febens exit, two black SUVs pulled onto the highway from behind. Their lights were off. Their movements were precise. Darius did not notice them at first. He was listening to one of Miguel's recordings, the voice of a frightened victim explaining how the extortion worked. The pain in the voice reminded Darius why he had begun this mission. Then he saw the headlights appear in his mirror. They accelerated. They closed the distance fast. Darius tightened his grip on the wheel. His instincts sharpened immediately. He took the next exit, hoping to shake them off. They followed. The road was empty. The danger was clear now. The SUV, Cheers, boxed him in. One moved to his right, one to his left. The third stayed behind. Darius pressed the gas pedal, but he was trapped. The SUV on his right swerved sharply and slammed into his car. Darius fought to keep control. The second SUV rammed the back of his vehicle. The car spun. The guardrail rose in his headlights. He braced himself as metal screamed and the car crashed through the barrier. He felt the impact across his body. His vision blurred. A door opened behind him. Heavy footsteps approached. Briggs' voice broke through the ringing in Darius's ears. "Bring him out!" Hands grabbed Darius's jacket and pulled him from the wreck. His feet dragged across the ground. A sharp pain filled his ribs. Someone struck him in the stomach. Breath left him. The world tilted. He heard Briggs again. "Take him to the warehouse." Darius felt a hood pulled over his head. He tried to breathe through the fabric. The pain continued. Someone kicked his side. His body folded. He tasted iron. The last thing he heard before losing consciousness was Briggs whispering, "You should have stayed away." Darius Hale regained consciousness to the sound of water dripping somewhere in the dark. The hood over his head clung to his face with each shallow breath. His ribs throbbed with a steady ache. His arms were pulled behind him, wrists tied to a metal chair. He forced his mind to stay calm. Pain did not frighten him. Panic did, and he refused to allow panic to weaken him now. He pulled one breath deeper, then another, steadying his pulse. A harsh voice broke the silence. "Take off the hood." Hands grabbed the fabric and tore it upward. Light flooded Darius's eyes. The warehouse around him appeared dim and cold. Briggs stood only a few feet away. His expression carried a calm that was more dangerous than anger. Two men from Juarez stood behind him. One held a bucket. The other held a wooden baton. Their faces showed no hesitation. They had done this before. Briggs stepped closer. "You thought you were smarter than us," he said quietly. "You thought your recordings meant something." Darius said nothing. Speaking now would give Briggs what he wanted. Silence denied him control. Briggs leaned down. "You are going to sign a statement. It says the evidence you gathered is false. It says you acted alone. It says you lied. You sign it, and you live. You refuse, and you disappear." Darius looked at him with steady eyes. "I will not sign." Briggs exhaled with irritation. "You have no idea how fragile you are." He nodded to the man with the bucket. The man lifted it and poured freezing water over Darius's head and shoulders. The cold hit him like a shock. His skin tightened, his muscles tensed. He fought to keep his breath smooth. "Again," Briggs said. Another wave of icy water struck him. Darius felt the cold bury itself deep into his chest. His breathing slowed. Pain sharpened. Briggs circled him. "You still believe in justice," he said. "You still believe someone will come for you?" Darius did not respond. Briggs's voice hardened. "No one is coming." The second man stepped forward and drove the baton into Darius's abdomen. The impact forced the air from his lungs. His vision blurred. He felt the pain spread across his ribs like a fire. He forced his body upright again, refusing to slump. Briggs ordered another blow. This one deeper. Darius's jaw trembled. His hands clenched behind the chair. Briggs leaned close to him. "Sign the confession." Darius lifted his eyes. "No." Briggs straightened. His face darkened with frustration. "You think you are protecting someone? You think you are part of something bigger? But you are alone, and you are running out of time." Darius held his breath for one quiet moment before speaking. "I do not quit." Briggs stepped back. "Fine. You want pain? You will have pain." He signaled the man again. The baton struck Darius's side. His body twisted. The hood, now hanging around his neck, absorbed the sweat that ran down his jaw. Darius forced himself to remain conscious, forced his mind to stay focused, forced his heart to keep a steady pace. The truth depended on endurance. Then the warehouse lights flickered. The men paused. Briggs looked up. Darius felt a flicker of hope he tried to suppress. Hope could be dangerous. Hope could break concentration. Hope could create illusions. But something had changed in the air. Something small, but real. In a fenced-off FBI office in Houston, Agent Isabella Quinn looked at the signal on her screen. The GPS tracker hidden in Darius's shoe had gone still. The data showed no movement for 26 minutes. The mapping program marked the warehouse location in Fabenz. She knew she had no time for protocol. She gathered her team. "He is alive," Isabella said, "and he is not moving. Gear up. We leave now." Her voice carried urgency, but not fear. She had trained for moments like this. She knew the danger. She also knew the stakes. Her team moved quickly, gathering vests, radios, and rifles. Isabella led them to the convoy. The engines ignited. Tires rolled fast across the asphalt. Back in the warehouse, Briggs turned toward Darius again. "This ends tonight." Darius inhaled slowly. "No," he whispered. "It ends with you." Briggs's eyes darkened. "Enough." He reached for the baton himself. He raised it high. He prepared to strike. That was when the first blast echoed through the warehouse wall. A flash of light tore through the darkness. The men around Briggs turned toward the sound. A second blast followed. The metal door at the far end of the warehouse buckled inward. Briggs shouted. "Get ready!" The door burst open. Isabella Quinn's team entered with tactical precision. Rifles raised, movements sharp, commands clear. "FBI, drop your weapons!" The Juarez men aimed at the agents. A gunshot rang out. Isabella's team returned fire. One man fell. The other dropped his weapon and raised his hands. Briggs tried to run toward the back exit. Isabella saw him and shouted, "Stop! Do not move!" He ignored her. She fired once. The bullet struck him in the leg. Briggs collapsed with a sharp cry of pain. The baton clattered to the floor. Isabella rushed to Darius. She cut the restraints from his wrists. Darius slumped forward. His breath labored. She steadied him with one hand and surveyed the damage. Bruising, swelling, possible fractures. But he was conscious, and he was alive. "We came as fast as we could," she said. Darius looked up at her through the pain. "Thank you." She nodded. "We are not done. We still have to bring all of them down." Darius attempted to stand. His legs trembled. Isabella held him steady. Two agents lifted him onto a stretcher. As they carried him out of the warehouse, the cold night air touched his skin. The pain deepened, but the relief was stronger. He heard Briggs groaning on the ground, cursing, defeated. Isabella walked beside Darius as the stretcher moved toward the ambulance. "You held on," she said. Darius whispered softly. "I had to." "Why?" she asked. "For the victims," he answered. "For the ones no one listened to." Isabella nodded with deep respect. "Then we will finish this." The ambulance doors closed. Darius lay back against the stretcher. His ribs burned. His breath was shallow. But his mind was clear. Everything he had fought for was finally moving toward daylight. He whispered one final sentence before the medication pulled him into silence. "Justice is slow, but it comes." Darius Hale sat in the wheelchair at the center of the Austin Press Club, his body wrapped in bandages, his ribs taped, his breathing slow but steady. The room around him pulsed with quiet tension. Reporters whispered. Cameras waited. Lives would change in the next hour, and Darius understood the weight of what he was about to do. He looked down at his hands for a moment. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion earned through days of violence, silence, and endurance. Yet even in the weakness of his body, his resolve remained unchanged. He had come to Austin not to tell a story, but to open the truth with clarity. Justice demanded nothing less. Judge Sophia Cruz stood behind the podium. Her posture was firm. Her eyes held the dignity of someone who had lost and yet remained unbroken. She introduced Darius with a voice that carried both sorrow and strength. "Today," she said, "you will hear what has been hidden for 18 years." Darius lifted himself slowly. The pain in his ribs tightened as he rose from the wheelchair, but he stood tall. The room fell silent. Every camera focused on him. Every person leaned forward. Darius took one careful breath and began. "My name is Darius Hale," he said. "I am a federal agent. I was assigned to investigate corruption at the border. What I found was a system built on fear, money, and silence." He reached into a small case beside him and withdrew the first recording. He placed it on the podium and pressed play. Briggs's voice filled the room, cold, confident, a voice demanding payment from a terrified family, a voice that threatened deportation, violence, and death. The cruelty echoed against the walls. Gasps rose from reporters. Pens froze above notepads. Cameras zoomed in. Briggs's words were no longer hidden in the desert. They were now public, undeniable, and irreversible. Darius continued. This was not one incident. This was not one family. This was a system, and it involved more than one man. He played the second recording. The voice of Elias Crow filled the room. The mayor spoke casually about dividing extortion money into campaign accounts. He laughed about cleaning up loose ends. He spoke of the victims as if they were cargo in a warehouse. The mask he wore in public fell away in an instant. Then Darius played the third recording. It held the voice of District Attorney Marisol Vega. She ordered complaints to be buried. She directed files to be destroyed. She protected her cousin, the mayor, with a precision shaped by greed and loyalty to corruption. Her tone revealed the truth that had been hidden behind the authority of her office. The reactions in the room changed. Shock turned into anger. Anger turned into focus. Reporters exchanged urgent glances. They understood the magnitude of what they were hearing. Darius paused, gripping the podium for support. His ribs stung with each breath, but the truth carried him forward. "These recordings," he said, "are part of a larger investigation. Documents, ledgers, transfer histories, eyewitness accounts. They all point to an organized network of extortion involving Border Patrol leadership, the mayor's office, and the district attorney." He stepped back for a moment. His body weakened, but his voice remained strong. Judge Cruz stepped forward and placed a hand on the stack of documents behind him. "I have reviewed these files," she said. "They are legitimate, they are complete, and they describe a criminal system that violated federal law for nearly 2 decades. Journalist Theo Park, standing near the front row, began live streaming across all 5 platforms he controlled. His audience climbed by the second. Messages flooded the feed. Communities in El Paso began gathering outside city buildings. People who had lived in fear for years finally heard proof that their suffering was real. Darius felt a faint tremor in his legs. He lowered himself back into the wheelchair, but his voice did not waver. "I was kidnapped," he said. "I was beaten. I was forced to sign a false confession. I refused because the victims deserved better." The room held its breath. The truth was no longer a file. It was a human story. It was a man sitting in a wheelchair, held together by bandages, choosing courage over silence. Judge Cruz stepped beside him. "We stand with him," she said, "and we stand with every victim who was silenced." A reporter raised a hand. "What happens now?" Before Darius could answer, another voice echoed across the room. Agent Isabella Quinn entered from the side doorway wearing her FBI jacket, her presence steady and composed. "What happens now," she said, "is accountability." She stepped to the podium. "The evidence has already been forwarded to the Department of Justice. The investigation has moved to a federal level. As of this afternoon, warrants have been signed, and arrests will begin tonight." The room erupted. Reporters called out questions. Cameras flashed. Darius closed his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the surge of emotion. He felt no triumph, only relief. The victims were finally being heard. 4 hours later, the arrests began in El Paso. Federal agents approached Mayor Crow's home. He tried to slip out through the backyard, but agents surrounded him. The cuffs clicked shut. His face turned pale. His wife cried as he was led away. At the district attorney's office, Marisol Vega attempted to lock herself inside her private conference room. Agents broke the door and pulled her out. She shouted at them. She claimed innocence, but the recordings ended any defense she tried to offer. At the airport, Briggs and Soto attempted to board a private plane bound for Mexico. Briggs limped on his injured leg, pushing forward with desperation. Soto walked behind him, shaking, whispering her son's name. Agents intercepted them on the runway. Briggs tried to fight. He was restrained within seconds. Soto surrendered instantly, tears running down her face. Her voice broke as she said, "Please protect my son." By midnight, the network had collapsed. Darius watched the news coverage from his hospital bed in Austin. His breathing was slow. His ribs hurt. But his spirit was steady. This was the moment he had fought for. Each arrest brought a quiet confirmation that justice, though slow, was moving toward truth. Isabella Quinn entered his room. "It is done," she said softly. Darius nodded. "Thank you." She pulled up a chair. "You did what no one else could." Darius looked towards the window. "No," he said. "I did what someone needed to do." Isabella remained silent for a moment. She understood the weight behind the words. Darius whispered again. "They will not silence the victims anymore." Outside, the lights of Austin glowed through the glass. A city unaware of the man who had endured violence to bring truth to the surface. But somewhere across the state, families who had lived in fear began to feel something they had not felt in years. Hope. And though Darius sat alone in the quiet room, he felt a single truth settle deep within him. The fight was entering its final stage, and justice was finally stepping into the light. 4 months passed before the final verdicts were read. Yet the consequences of the investigation had already reshaped El Paso long before the judges spoke. Darius Hale sat in the back row of the federal courtroom. His posture was straight. His breathing was steady. His eyes were calm. His ribs had healed. But the memory of every strike and every threat still lived quietly inside him. He did not come for credit. He came because accountability mattered, and accountability was now unfolding one life at a time. Donovan Briggs stood before the judge first. His hands were cuffed. His once commanding voice was thin. His eyes no longer carried the arrogance that had dominated the border for nearly 2 decades. The judge spoke with measured weight. "For conspiracy, extortion, collusion with a foreign criminal organization, and obstruction of justice, I sentence you to 15 years in federal custody." Briggs closed his eyes. His wife sat several rows behind him, her hands clasped tightly. She did not speak. She did not cry. She only stared forward with a stillness that revealed years of denial collapsing all at once. His son had refused to attend the hearing. Darius felt no pleasure in Briggs's fall, only a quiet solemnity. Abuse had consequences. Power, when misused, carried a cost that could not be ignored forever. Camila Soto was next. She walked slowly toward the bench, wearing the plain beige uniform of a federal defendant. Her shoulders were bent. Her eyes were tired, shadowed by months of fear and shame. She did not deny her actions. She did not defend herself. She offered only one sentence. "I tried to save my son." The judge paused before responding. "You acted under threat, but you still harmed innocent people. I sentence you to 10 years in federal custody, and I recommend immediate placement of your son into protective supervision," Soto cried quietly. She looked at Darius as officers led her away. Her lips formed the words, "Thank you," though no sound emerged. Darius felt a deep ache, not of pity, but of understanding. She had been both a victim and a perpetrator, and the truth of that tension would follow her forever. 18 months later, she would take her own life in custody, leaving behind a letter asking her son to forgive her. Darius would read the news with a heavy heart, knowing she had carried a burden too large for one person. Elias Crow entered the courtroom with the posture of a man who had lost everything. The former mayor, once celebrated and admired, now appeared drained of all certainty. His clothing hung loose. His breath shook. The judge spoke firmly. "For corruption, financial abuse, and collusion with organized crime, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and permanently barred from holding public office." Crow's face fell. He clutched the table for support. He tried to speak, but the words would not come. When officers approached, he whispered something Darius barely heard. "I thought it would never come to this. Within a year, Crow would die of a heart attack inside the medical wing of the facility. His legacy would be rewritten in the shadow of his actions. Marisol Vega entered last. Escorted by marshals, she carried no remorse. Her gaze remained sharp even behind the tired lines on her face. She represented the coldest part of the system, the willingness to destroy truth to preserve power. The judge addressed her with clear disapproval. Your conduct undermined justice, violated your oath, and victimized the vulnerable. You are sentenced to 8 years in federal custody, and your law license is permanently revoked. Vega straightened as the sentence was read, but her expression did not soften. She accepted the judgment without outward emotion, as if resignation had replaced pride. Years later, she would live in an isolated nursing home, visited by no one, her title and influence stripped away. The silence that followed her would serve as the final verdict of her life. When the last sentence was delivered, Darius remained seated for a long moment. He did not rise immediately. His thoughts drifted to the families who had crossed the border with hope and found fear instead. His thoughts drifted to those who had been silenced, threatened, or turned away when they sought help. He thought of the Guatemalan father who had trembled beneath Briggs's grip. He thought of the years of fear that had shaped lives without reason. And he understood that justice, though delivered today, could not erase all the suffering, but it could prevent the cycle from continuing. Outside the courthouse, Rosa Hale waited for him. She had once been a victim, forced to surrender $10,000 at a checkpoint. Now she stood with a new badge pinned to her chest. The governor had appointed her as the new chief of the reformed border unit. Her voice carried a calm authority. "We begin again," she said. Darius nodded. "Yes, we do." She looked at him with gratitude. "You gave people their voice back." Darius shook his head gently. "They always had a voice. They just needed someone to hear it." Rosa smiled. "Then stay. Help us rebuild." Darius had been offered a promotion to Washington, an office, a title, and distance from danger, but he had refused. El Paso needed someone who understood the cost of silence. He chose to remain, not for glory, not for career, but because justice demanded presence. With funds seized from the extortion network, a $12 million compensation program began. 60 victims received restitution. Families who had lost hope found dignity again. One of them was Juan Rivera, the young man Darius had helped early in the investigation. With the settlement money, Juan opened the first legal Mexican bakery in downtown El Paso. Darius visited on the second day of business. Juan's voice shook with emotion when he said, "You saved my life," Darius answered softly. "You saved your own. I only helped the truth reach daylight." As the months passed, the city slowly transformed. The corruption that had once defined the border began to loosen its grip. New leadership took root. Training changed. Oversight strengthened. And the fear that had lived in the shadows began to fade. On a quiet morning, Darius walked onto the international bridge overlooking the Rio Grande. The river moved with a soft persistence, neither rushing nor stopping. He stood alone, breathing deeply, letting the weight of his journey settle into something calm. He whispered to himself, not as a prayer, but as a promise. Justice is never easy, but it comes, as long as someone does not quit. He stayed there for a long moment, steady, quiet, and unwavering. A new dawn had risen over the Rio Grande, and Darius Hale, scarred but unbroken, stood ready for whatever came next. Thank you for staying with this story. If it meant something to you, please subscribe and leave a like.